In the heart of Pennsylvania, surrounded by silent hills and secrets buried beneath centuries-old stones, a young woman is sold like merchandise and sent to a mansion where mourning rules and silence is punishment. Ashford Hall is not just a house. It is a labyrinth of memories, of unspoken pacts, restrained love, and dangerous truths. When Evelyn crosses its gates for the first time, she has no idea she is about to change the fate of everyone, including her own. What is stronger, guilt or desire, honor or freedom? Welcome to the story of I Was Sold to a Duke. Tell me, where are you listening from, and what do you love most about historical romances? Pennsylvania, spring of 1837. The sky was tinted a thick gray as Evelyn Carter rode along, her shoulders hunched and trembling hands resting on her lap inside the modest carriage that carried her toward the unknown. The rhythmic clatter of the horse's hooves on the dirt road seemed to mark the tempo of her resignation. Nothing remained now of the hope she had once carried in her chest, only the dry weight of shame and the bitter certainty that for some, life was no more than a simple coin to be traded. The scent of impending rain mingled with the rough aroma of the carriage's aged wood. Evelyn gazed through the small circular window where the field stretched into rolling hills covered in damp grass. Somewhere behind her, lost in the past, was the world she once knew. The fleeting affection of a mother taken too soon, the cruel disdain of the man who had just sold her as if she were nothing more than a worthless object. Ashford Hall, the coachman announced in a hoarse, indifferent voice. Evelyn lifted her gaze and through the veil of mist saw the silhouette of a mansion that seemed to rise from the earth itself, vast, severe, with towers that cut through the sky like stone lances. An iron gate creaked as it opened, the sound echoing inside her like a dark omen. The carriage stopped before a stone staircase. Before she could steady her emotions, the door was abruptly opened by a middle-aged woman with a bony face and eyes as hard as dry twigs. "Peg Wilkins, housekeeper," the woman announced flatly. "Follow me." Evelyn stepped down from the carriage with the awkward grace of someone still unused to being treated as property. She carried only a small, worn leather bag containing a cotton dress, a pair of mended stockings, and a book that had belonged to her mother, the only inheritance she had left. She entered Ashford Hall under the weight of curious and calculating glances that sized her up from afar, judging every frayed thread of her dress, every hesitant movement of her hands. The entrance hall was vast, its polished marble floors reflecting the dim light of hanging candelabras. Faded tapestries lined the walls, muffling sounds and creating an oppressive silence that made her skin prickle. The housekeeper led her through long, cold corridors until they stopped in front of a simple wooden door. "This will be your room," she announced, pushing the door open with a brusque gesture. Inside, Evelyn found a narrow bed, a cracked dresser, and a small high window, nearly out of reach. There was no fireplace to warm the room. It was as if the house itself rejected her presence. "Your duties begin at sunrise. You'll be responsible for cleaning the children's quarters and assisting the governess. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look the masters in the eye. Do not expect kindness." Evelyn only bowed her head, her throat too tight to form words. Peg Wilkins gave her a look of disdain, as if already anticipating her failure. "The Duke wishes to see you now." Evelyn's heart raced. She followed the housekeeper into a large room flanked by tall shelves filled with books. Light filtered through dusty windows, casting golden streaks across the somber space. He was there. Henry Ashford. The Duke. Standing by a window, his stern profile was outlined against the pale daylight. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, slightly wavy hair, he wore sober, impeccably tailored clothes. His jawline was as sharp as a verdict. Evelyn couldn't make out the color of his eyes from a distance, but she felt the weight of his gaze settle on her, cold as winter. When he turned to face her, a chill ran down her spine. There was something about this man that words could not define. A deep sorrow, so thick it seemed to permeate the very air around him. "So this is the new maid," he said without emotion. His voice was deep, resonating like the echo of something lost. "Evelyn Carter," Wilkins supplied. The Duke's gaze swept over her, not with desire, but with an indifference so cutting it hurt more than any humiliation. "I hope you know how to obey." Evelyn gave a slight curtsy, a gesture of submission learned in haste. "Yes, sir." For a brief moment their eyes met, and Evelyn felt a sharp tug in her chest. Something flickered in those deep blue eyes, perhaps a shadow, perhaps a memory. But then he looked away, as if she were invisible. "You may leave," he said, turning back to the window. Wilkins gave a nod, and Evelyn exited the room with her heart pounding, like someone who had just survived a battlefield. The afternoon was dipped in copper tones as she was led upstairs to the children's quarters. The housekeeper knocked softly before entering. "Mrs. Lydia and Clara, this is Evelyn, your new maid." The girls sat by the fireplace, Lydia idly flipping through a book and Clara clutching a well-worn doll, peeking up with frightened eyes. Lydia, the elder, was the first to look up. Her brown gaze studied Evelyn with the caution of someone who had learned not to trust too early. Her light brown hair was braided tightly. Clara, younger, with rosy cheeks and large blue eyes, nestled closer to her doll. No words were spoken. No smile was offered. Evelyn bowed before them, respectful but careful not to meet their gaze directly. "It is an honor to serve you, young ladies," she murmured. The girls remained still, like little statues chipped at the edges. The silence was an invisible wall between them and the world, a wall Evelyn sensed she would have to learn how to cross. Later that night, seated on the edge of her narrow bed, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time that day. Outside, the rain began to fall in heavy drops, tapping against the window pane. The sound was a lament for the girl she once had been, for the freedom she had lost, for the dreams now as distant as the stars hidden behind storm-laden clouds. But holding her mother's old book tightly to her chest, Evelyn made a silent vow. She would not be broken. If she had to begin her life as a maid, she would make that her first step toward something much greater. And so, as night descended upon the hills and the mansion whispered its ancient secrets through walls of stone, Evelyn Carter, sold, humiliated but not defeated, began, unknowingly, to change Ashford Hall's fate forever. Dawn arrived wrapped in mist and cold, as if the earth itself rejected the light of a new day. Evelyn woke to the distant sound of the kitchen bell, marking the first call for the servants. The room, cold and shadowy, felt more like a cell than a shelter, and she had to summon all her inner strength to rise and dress in the simple gown assigned to the maids. Ashford Hall, in those early hours, breathed in muffled whispers. The tall windows let in timid rays of light, and the hallways echoed only with the worn soles of servants' shoes and the occasional creak of old wood. Every corner of the mansion seemed saturated with thick sorrow, as though the very air was steeped in longing. Peg Wilkins awaited her at the top of the staircase, her expression stern and posture rigid. "The children are in their rooms. You are to prepare their baths and assist them as needed. No unnecessary conversation. They are delicate and fragile," she added, though the coldness in her tone made it sound more like a warning than concern. Evelyn simply nodded, suppressing the urge to respond. She followed Wilkins to the children's wing, where the doors bore softer decorations, though still marked by the wear of time. Her first interaction that morning with Lydia and Clara revealed even more of the silent, tense nature that governed the house. Lydia sat focused at a desk, writing something with an uncertain hand, while Clara, younger, played half-heartedly with a frayed cloth doll. Lydia glanced at Evelyn with caution, measured as if evaluating her for invisible signs. Clara did not even notice her, lost in her own world of absences. "Good morning, young ladies," Evelyn ventured, bowing slightly in respectful greeting. No reply came. Silence fell between them like a heavy curtain. Gently, Evelyn approached the wash basin, preparing the girls' bath. Her movements were precise and quiet, each gesture careful not to disturb the delicate, heavy atmosphere around them. The soft scent of lavender soap mingled with the dormant scent of old furniture, creating an environment both melancholic and comforting. When she extended a warm towel to Clara, the girl hesitated, recoiling instinctively. Evelyn stepped back as well, respecting the child's space, feeling a sharp pang in her chest. It was not just shyness, it was fear. As Lydia watched silently, Evelyn realized something words could not express. These girls had been raised under the weight of unspoken sorrow, wrapped in rigid protocols and cold gestures. There were no laughs in the hallways, no warmth in the eyes. There was only absence. Throughout the morning, Evelyn carried out her tasks, striving to create a routine that was both discreet and welcoming. She gathered clothes, tidied toys forgotten in corners, straightened books left askew. Each small act was a silent attempt to reach the girls' hearts without upsetting the fragile balance that held Ashford Hall together. While wiping down the dresser in Clara's room, Evelyn's eyes fell upon a silver-framed portrait, discreetly positioned behind a stack of children's books. It depicted a young woman with serene, melancholic beauty, wearing an elegant pale gown, surrounded by a blooming garden. The faint smile on her lips seemed on the verge of fading. Evelyn knew, without asking, that it was the late Duchess. Her heart tightened. There was so much life in that captured gaze that it was impossible not to feel the loss as something tangible. And yet, no fresh flowers adorned the frame. No sign indicated that the image was still honored by living memory. She returned to work, carrying that impression like an invisible weight throughout the day. In the afternoon, while finishing the toy room's organization, she was startled by the sound of horses' hooves in the courtyard. Curious, she peeked discreetly through the window and saw the arrival of an opulent carriage, from which descended a woman of studied elegance, wrapped in a navy blue silk dress and a hat adorned with feathers. It was Lady Genevieve Prescott. Her name circulated among the staff like an unavoidable presence. A widowed English viscountess, Genevieve had established herself in the United States years before, and her ambition for social influence was as evident as her disdain for those she deemed beneath her. The visit was announced with urgency, and the house, already tense, sank into subtle nervousness. The servants rushed to arrange fresh flowers in the drawing room, polish the silver candlesticks, and straighten curtains that had previously gone unnoticed. Evelyn, warned to stay out of the way, withdrew with the girls to the children's wing. However, as she passed discreetly through the hallway that led to the main staircase, she inevitably crossed paths with the visitor. Lady Genevieve stopped in front of her as if Evelyn were a nuisance to be removed. Her green eyes scanned her from head to toe, and a cold smile curved her perfectly painted lips. "So you're the new acquisition of Ashford Hall," she said in a tone just loud enough to be offensive. Evelyn kept her eyes down, blood pounding in her temples. She replied with a discreet curtsy, not daring to meet her gaze. Genevieve let out a low laugh, as if her opinion had already been formed, and swept past with a rustle of impeccable skirts. Evelyn continued on with measured steps, feeling the weight of that declared disdain on her back. That night, after the children had been put to bed and silence returned to the cold corridors of the mansion, Evelyn retired to her room, carrying with her a strange mixture of emotions. As she tried to fall asleep, she heard Clara softly crying in the next room. The sound was so faint it could have been mistaken for the whisper of the wind, but to Evelyn it cut like a blade. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the strict order not to cross boundaries. But instinct spoke louder than fear. She rose, crossed the hallway barefoot, and silently entered the room. Clara curled beneath the covers, her face wet with silent tears. Evelyn knelt by the bed, and moved by a tenderness as old as humanity itself, began to sing a lullaby her mother had once sung on difficult days. The melody was simple, but each note carried centuries of hope and comfort. Gradually, Clara's sobs quieted. The girl relaxed, her eyes closing again as she surrendered to a more peaceful sleep. Evelyn remained there for a while, gently stroking the child's fine hair until she was sure the nightmare had passed. In that moment, she knew that even within the rigidity of that house, even under eyes of scorn and iron rules, something had begun to change. It would not be easy, but not all was lost. And perhaps in the shadows of mourning and fear, a thread of light still waited to be found. The third day at Ashford Hall dawned under a thick mist, like a gray veil resting over the silent hills. The trees, motionless under the weight of dew, seemed to guard ancient secrets, and the wind whispering through the mansion's stones carried with it a kind of unrest that defied description. Evelyn woke before the bell rang, surrounded by an uneasy silence. Her room remained cold, the air thick with the scent of damp wood. She dressed quietly, her movements shaped by a routine she was beginning to learn. One of light footsteps, lowered eyes, and unyielding obedience. Yet that morning, something in her chest pulsed to a different rhythm, as if a silent calling invited her to see what had not yet been revealed. After completing her morning duties and ensuring Lydia and Clara were under the governess's care, Evelyn seized a moment of calm to discreetly explore the estate's grounds. She had not been forbidden from walking in the garden, though it was clear her presence was not entirely welcome beyond designated limits. She followed the stone path behind the mansion, skirting an old moss-covered fountain, until her eyes landed on a forgotten structure of glass and iron at the edge of the grounds, nearly swallowed by overgrowth. It was a greenhouse, or what remained of one. The windows were filthy, layered in dead leaves, and some panes were cracked, as if the structure itself resisted the passing years. Her heart racing, Evelyn carefully pushed open the rusted door, which creaked as though protesting her presence. Inside was a world apart. Rotting wooden benches, toppled pots, dried plants tangled in abandoned trellises. The air was thick with dust and silence, but there was something more. A delicate, almost sacred feeling. Light filtered through the grimy glass in golden beams, illuminating small details lost to time. A copper watering can, an apron hanging from a hook, and on a marble table a pair of pruning shears resting beside a faded blue ribbon. Evelyn touched the ribbon with her fingertips. The fabric was fine, delicate. It had belonged to someone who had tended this place with care and affection. and somehow she knew. This greenhouse had once belonged to the Duchess. A sudden rustle interrupted her thoughts. When she turned, she saw the imposing figure of Henry Ashford standing in the doorway. The Duke regarded her with an unreadable expression, as if her presence had stirred memories he preferred to keep buried. "This place is closed," he said, his voice low but firm. Evelyn straightened at once, her heart pounding. "Forgive me, sir. I didn't know it was off limits. I saw the structure and—" "There's no need to explain," he interrupted, stepping inside with slow steps, his eyes wandering over the greenhouse interior. He walked to the center of the space, stopping in front of an empty pot. He touched it with his fingertips, then ran his hand along the edge of the table where Evelyn had stood. There was a restrained sorrow in his movements, as if each detail brought forth memories that still wounded him. "My wife used to spend hours here," he said, almost in a whisper. "She loved flowers more than anything. She had gentle, patient hands. Everything she touched would bloom." Evelyn remained silent, feeling the weight of his words hang between them like a living shadow. "After she died," he continued without looking at her, "no one entered here again. I thought time would erase things, but time is a terrible gardener." He finally turned, and their eyes met. His face showed weariness, but also something deeper, a vulnerability that contrasted with his usual rigidity. For a brief moment, the silence between them was not uncomfortable, but full of meaning no words could convey. "Return to the house," he said gently. "This isn't a place for maids." Evelyn gave a discreet curtsy and left without another word, but her heart carried a fragment of that sadness. She sensed, more than understood, that something inside that man was broken, something the death of his wife had left exposed and unhealed, and now her presence, though unintentional, had begun to touch those cracks. In the days that followed, Evelyn noticed subtle changes in everyone around her. Peg Wilkins, especially, seemed to watch her more closely. The housekeeper's eyes followed her through the halls whenever she thought she was alone. There was a restrained suspicion in her gaze, as if Evelyn had crossed an invisible boundary by entering the greenhouse. During one of the servants' meals in the kitchen, Evelyn overheard muffled whispers. One of the maids was speaking softly about the lady of the house, the late Duchess. "They say she fell ill suddenly," the girl murmured, "and no one really knows how. She was so young, so full of life." "Silence," Wilkins snapped, suddenly entering the kitchen. "That kind of talk will not be tolerated." Heads lowered at once. Evelyn felt the chill of that command spread through the room, stifling any remaining curiosity. The Duchess's name was a constant yet inspoken presence in Ashford Hall's corridors, something unspoken but always felt. Later, while brushing Clara's hair before bed, Evelyn noticed a sketchbook under the girl's bed. Turning its pages gently, she saw childlike drawings: flowers, birds, a figure in a long skirt with flowing hair, always with a garden in the background. "Is that your mother?" she asked softly. Clara nodded but said nothing. Her eyes, however, met Evelyn's with a depth so intense it almost hurt. In that exchange, an invisible bridge seemed to form between absence and presence, between silence and the need for affection. Evelyn tucked the sketchbook away with the same care as one would treat a treasure. As she extinguished the bedroom lamp, she looked out at the night through the window. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, as if nature itself whispered forgotten stories. Ashford Hall, with its cold halls and echoing corridors, was a house in mourning, and that mourning, like a shadow, had seeped into every wall, every gesture, every prolonged silence. But Evelyn, though still unsure of her place, felt something inside her that could not be extinguished, a quiet strength, a discreet tenderness, a light that refused to go out even in the thickest darkness. The Duchess's shadow still hovered over them all, but perhaps, contrary to what they feared, it was not merely a painful memory. Perhaps it was a calling, a plea for peace. And, unknowingly, Evelyn had begun to listen. Spring crept timidly over the hills of Ashford Hall. Each morning the garden revealed small tentative buds among the dry leaves, as if nature, slowly, dared to bloom even in soil soaked with sorrowful memories. The sky, though often overcast, allowed glimpses of blue between heavy clouds, and the sparse songs of birds began to break the dense silence that still ruled the mansion's corridors. Evelyn Carter followed her routine with quiet dedication. She was discreet, punctual, meticulous with every task, and yet there was a certain lightness in her gestures that stood in contrast to the rigid manner of the older servants. Her presence no longer went unnoticed. Even though few spoke to her directly, the glances became more frequent, some curious, others cautionary, as if they sensed something stirring, though no one dared to name it. That afternoon, while gathering clothes from the makeshift clothesline near the servants' wing, Evelyn was called by the scullery maid, breathless, her cheeks flushed. "There's a man at the back gate. He says he knows you. He's asking to speak with you." Evelyn's heart gave an involuntary jolt. Her mind raced through forgotten names, faded faces. She hurried to the small service gate, and there, beneath the pale afternoon sun, she recognized a figure that seemed plucked from another time. "Thomas?" The young man smiled awkwardly. His brown hair was longer than she remembered, and the patchy beard barely hid his boyish features. He wore simple clothes stained with road dust and carried a cloth bundle slung over one shoulder. "Didn't expect to find you here. They told me they were looking for stable hands. I thought maybe—" "How did you know I was here?" she interrupted, trying to keep her voice low. Thomas hesitated. "A coachman in the village mentioned it. Said a new maid had arrived at the estate. I put the pieces together. Evelyn Carter at Ashford Hall, not a common name." She glanced around, afraid someone might be watching. "You need to be discreet," she warned. "This place, it's not like others. The walls have ears." Thomas seemed to understand, and for a moment his expression softened, filled with shared memories. They had grown up on the same dusty village streets, trading old books and even older dreams. But time and reality had torn those hopes apart, and now, standing there, they were like strangers before a past neither dared to fully acknowledge. "Listen," Thomas said more seriously, "maybe I can find something here, any kind of work, but if you don't want me to stay, I'll leave right now." Evelyn hesitated. His presence might raise questions. More than that, it might awaken truths she struggled to keep buried. "Speak to the steward, he'll decide, but please, don't say anything about me." Thomas nodded, and before turning away, he added in a quiet voice, "Do you still remember the night we read that poem, Hidden in the Attic?" Evelyn didn't answer. She simply looked down, her chest tightening with memories far too tender to summon here, within the cold walls of a house that did not belong to her. That same night, Ashford Hall received an unexpected, or rather unwelcome, visitor, at least in Evelyn's eyes. Lady Genevieve Prescott arrived wrapped in a wine-colored dress, its black lace sleeves and delicate veil accentuating her perfectly arranged hair. Her posture was regal, her stride measured, her smile laden with intent. Evelyn encountered her in the corridor leading to the library, while returning children's books to the study room. Genevieve stopped as if deliberately blocking her way, her green eyes glinting like shattered glass as she looked Evelyn up and down. "Evelyn, is it?" she said, her voice honeyed but sharp. "There's something familiar about you. I can't shake the feeling I've seen you before, or someone very much like you." Evelyn tried to smile, inclining her head politely. "Perhaps just a coincidence, madam." "Perhaps," Genevieve said, stepping closer, "but I don't believe in coincidences, not in this house." She walked away without waiting for a reply, leaving behind a trail of floral perfume and suspicion. Evelyn's stomach turned. That had not been a mere observation, it was a warning. The next day, whispered rumors confirmed her suspicion. Lady Genevieve had sent a servant into the village to gather information, and by late afternoon, the look she cast Evelyn in the tea salon left no doubt. She had found out. Illegitimate daughter of a fallen aristocrat, a scandal quietly buried, a nameless lineage, a shame hidden beneath modest skirts and a fabricated anonymity. Genevieve now had a weapon, and she was not the type of woman to let it rust. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued caring for Lydia and Clara, who grew increasingly attached to her. The girls began to smile when she entered the room, and Clara reached for her to comb her hair or hold her worn-out teddy bear. Lydia, more reserved, watched Evelyn closely but accepted her help without protest, occasionally asking timid questions about stories, plants, and books. On a rainy afternoon, Clara invited her to sit with them by the fireplace. Evelyn, surprised, accepted. Lydia brought a book of tales and gently placed it in Evelyn's lap, as if offering trust without saying a word. Evelyn began to read aloud, and to the sound of her voice the flames crackled more softly. Time seemed to slow, and for a few minutes Ashford Hall ceased to be a place of mourning and secrets, becoming instead an embryonic home where small joys crept through the cracks of sorrow. In that moment, with Clara asleep on her shoulder and Lydia lying beside her with half-closed eyes, Evelyn realized what was truly at stake. It was not just her position in that house, nor the scornful glances, nor even Genevieve's threats. It was something greater. It was the bond taking root, and that, she knew, would be unforgivable to those who lived by control. As she left the room that night, she found Peg Wilkins standing in the hallway, like a sentinel cloaked in shadow. "You're getting too close," she said, her tone unchanged. "Don't forget who you are, or what you'll never be." Evelyn walked past her, her heart steady despite the fear, because in that moment she had made a choice. If life had taken her name, her rights and her safety, it would not take her truth. And if silent enemies lurked in the shadows, she would not retreat. Not now. Rain fell softly over the slate rooftops of Ashford Hall, dragging yellowed leaves along the stone paths and painting the garden with a thick, almost ritualistic silence. Clouds had covered the sky since dawn, making the day gray and still, as if time itself hesitated to move forward. Evelyn Carter had awakened earlier than usual. A restless unease had followed her movements since before sunrise. It was like a dense fog within, whispering nameless warnings. When she reached the children's wing, she found Clara sitting on the hallway floor, curled in on herself, her face pale and her eyes brimming with tears. "It's Lydia," the girl murmured, her voice faltering. "She has a fever. She won't speak. She won't move." Without a second thought, Evelyn pushed open the bedroom door and rushed to the girl's bed. Lydia lay beneath the covers like a cracked porcelain doll. Her face was burning, her eyes half closed and her lips dry. Her body shivered in cold waves, clashing with the blazing heat of the fever consuming her. Evelyn did not hesitate. She called for the governess, who hurried off to alert the housekeeper and summon the village doctor. In the meantime, Evelyn ran to the kitchen for clean cloths, cool water, and herbs to ease the discomfort. She moved with quiet urgency, firm and determined. In that moment, the world had narrowed around that fragile child who, without words, had entrusted her with affection. She spent the entire morning by the bed, changing compresses on Lydia's forehead, moistening her lips with care and holding her small hand in both of hers. Clara stayed nearby, silent, eyes fixed on her sister. Even though Evelyn had tried to send her to rest, the girl refused to leave the room. By early afternoon, the doctor arrived. An elderly man with a slow gait and tired eyes, he examined Lydia with a serious expression. He murmured medical terms to the housekeeper and prescribed complete rest, specific infusions, and constant monitoring. "There is risk," he said finally, turning to Peg Wilkins, "if the fever doesn't break within the next 24 hours. The housekeeper nodded curtly and escorted him out. Evelyn remained by the bedside, her own soul suspended on a fragile thread. The wall clock ticked relentlessly, and with each beat a new fear grew in her chest. It was early evening when she changed the now warm compress on Lydia's forehead again, and heard firm footsteps in the corridor. Turning around, she saw Henry Ashford standing at the doorway. His face was darkened, his eyes hidden beneath the shadows cast by the candlelight in the corner. His hands were clasped behind his back, his body tense. "How is she?" he asked in a low voice. Evelyn stood immediately. "The fever persists. She sleeps but doesn't rest. The doctor left clear instructions. I'm following them carefully." Henry stepped closer, his eyes fixed on his daughter. His expression, usually hard and composed, faltered for a moment. Beneath the layers of restraint there was a pain that felt almost childlike, the pain of a father who no longer knew how to protect what he loved most. "Thank you," he said after a few seconds, without looking directly at her. "There's no need to thank me, sir. Lydia is a very special child." He looked at her then, for the first time, with real attention. His eyes, darkened by the shadows, rested on hers as if searching for something he had missed before, and Evelyn, standing beside the bed, felt the tension between them swell like an invisible current. No words were spoken, no gesture crossed the space, but something new was present, something both seemed reluctant to acknowledge. Henry gave a slight nod, retreating in silence. As he left the door slightly ajar, a subtle, inspoken sign of trust. Night fell slowly over the mansion. Evelyn stayed by Lydia's side, changing cloths, humming lullabies, resting her forehead on the back of the girl's hand, as if the strength of her presence alone might soothe the fever. At 2 a.m, Clara finally fell asleep in the armchair. Evelyn covered her with a shawl and turned once more to the bed. Lydia murmured incoherent words in a fevered haze. Among them, one returned again and again, "Mama." The sound shattered Evelyn's heart into fragments. In a barely audible voice she whispered, "It's all right, my dear. I'm here. No one will leave you alone." On the nightstand, nestled among books and forgotten papers, Evelyn spotted a small leather-bound notebook, partially hidden beneath a lace handkerchief. It was not large, but looked old, with signs of wear and rounded corners. Curious, she reached for it and opened it slowly. She leafed through its yellowed pages, her fingers brushing delicate handwriting. It held descriptions of flowers, herbs, tea recipes, but also small fragments of thoughts, quiet confessions without an intended reader. The words belonged to someone surrounded by gentleness, yet silenced. Evelyn read one passage. "Today he walked past me as if I were a shadow. Will grief take him from me before death ever can? I wonder if one day he will look into my eyes again." The notebook belonged to the Duchess. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. This was not merely a diary. It was a silent witness to a sorrow woven into the greenhouse walls, the bedroom windows, the nights when perhaps no one had heard her weeping. She continued leafing through it until, abruptly, the pages stopped. The last ones were blank, as if the story had been interrupted or hidden. Evelyn closed the notebook gently and returned it to its place. Something in it unsettled her. An abrupt absence, a silence that felt intentional. With the first light of dawn, Lydia's fever finally began to break. Evelyn saw color return to the girl's cheeks, her breathing grow steadier, her fingers twitch with life. She sat down exhausted but relieved, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. That was when Henry returned. He entered the room slowly, his expression weary, hair slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't slept at all. Seeing his daughter better, he exhaled almost imperceptibly and rested a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "She's going to be all right," she said, her voice hoarse. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes lingered on her, as if beholding something rare, unexpected. His touch was brief, respectful, but within it lay a quiet tension, as if both knew they had for an instant crossed the boundaries their world had drawn between them. He withdrew his hand and simply said, "Keep caring for her the way you have. I trust no one else." And he left. Alone, with Clara still asleep and Lydia breathing softly beneath the sheets, Evelyn looked into the fading fire and felt a tight knot form in her chest. A bond had been formed there, invisible, silent but undeniable, and she knew that from that moment on she was no longer just a maid in that house. She was something more. Something that, even unnamed, was beginning to change the fate of everyone within those walls. The air at Ashford Hall felt suspended that morning, as if time itself were holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Through the tall windows of the main hall, the soft spring light poured in golden beams, dancing across the polished wooden floors and reflecting in the antique mirrors that adorned the walls. Servants moved briskly, carrying polished silver, fresh flower arrangements, and hand-embroidered linen napkins. It was the day of the traditional spring dinner, an event eagerly awaited by the local elite and meticulously orchestrated by Lady Genevieve Prescott, who treated the occasion as her personal stage. Evelyn watched the flurry of activity with attentive, silent eyes, helping to arrange the secondary tables, aligning the cutlery, and ensuring the napkins were folded identically at every place setting. Though her role remained limited to invisible tasks, her awareness of the environment was acute. Deep down she felt the discomfort of knowing she would be observed, even when no one seemed to look. In recent days, since Lydia's health had improved, she had noticed Genevieve's gaze falling on her more often, sharper, more calculating. As evening approached, the carriages began to arrive one by one, bringing gentlemen with upright postures and ladies draped in lace and heavy perfume. Restrained laughter, formal greetings, and measured smiles filled the halls like a masked dance, where every gesture was part of a meticulously choreographed social game. Wearing the dark dress reserved for serving maids, Evelyn was stationed near the grand archway separating the reception hall from the gallery where dinner would be served. Her task was simple: to circulate with the tray of drinks, avoid eye contact, and remain discreet. She knew Genevieve had placed her there on purpose. As guests filled the room, conversations grew livelier. Names were spoken with reverence, titles dropped casually, rumors whispered between sips of expensive wine, all contributing to an atmosphere of refinement and arrogance that defined this world. Henry Ashford entered the hall with his usual quiet elegance. He was impeccably dressed, the dark coat emphasizing his broad shoulders, and the velvet blue waistcoat softening the severity of his figure. He greeted guests with discreet nods, rejecting forced smiles, maintaining the reserved air that so distinguished him. When his eyes met Evelyn's for a moment, the room seemed to slow. She quickly looked down but felt the heat of that brief exchange like a burning breeze on her skin. It was something born of silence, a mute recognition shaped by recent memories and unnamed emotions. Lady Genevieve, meanwhile, glided through the hall like a seasoned hostess. Her lilac dress adorned with pearls shimmered under the chandelier light, and her elaborate hairstyle held a tiara of amethysts that announced her vanity before she even spoke. When she approached the drinks table where Evelyn served with steady hands and humble posture, the tone of the evening shifted. "Oh, my dear Evelyn," Genevieve said in a voice loud enough to catch the attention of 2 or 3 nearby guests. "What a pity you're so quiet tonight. I had imagined that with your noble lineage, you'd have stories enough to entertain the entire evening." The silence that followed was brief but cutting. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. The guests pretended not to notice, but their sidelong glances betrayed their hidden curiosity. Genevieve smiled as if offering a glass of poison with grace. Or perhaps you're just rehearsing your role as the perfect maid, always so obedient. Evelyn lowered her head and said nothing, not out of weakness but wisdom. Some things were not worth answering. Henry, watching from across the room, broke off his conversation with a prominent couple and crossed the hall with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped in front of Evelyn and Genevieve, his gaze landing firmly on the hostess. "Lady Prescott," he said with a slight nod, "I believe your seat at the head table is waiting." Genevieve smiled, charming as a serpent about to coil, and slipped her arm through his with feigned sweetness. Always so courteous, Henry. He walked with her a few paces, then quietly excused himself and returned to the hall without further word. Evelyn resumed circulating with the tray, but something had changed in her expression. It was not defiance nor resentment. It was simply the awareness that even in a world where words could wound more deeply than blades, silence could still be her greatest strength. Later, during dinner, Evelyn was called to the service wing adjoining the main hall to assist with the wine. Through the round window of the wooden door she could see part of the table, where guests toasted between forced laughs and conversations about business, marriages, and inheritances. Henry, seated at the head, wore an attentive expression, though he seemed detached from the frivolity around him. At one point, while she restocked bottles on a side table, Evelyn lifted her eyes and saw him watching her. There was no rebuke in his gaze, no pity. It was something rarer, quiet admiration, restrained interest, as if finally he saw her not as a maid, but as a woman who even in silence had made her presence known in that world of appearances. The look lasted only seconds, but for Evelyn it felt eternal, and it was enough. Later, when the event had ended and the guests were dispersing, as the servants began the arduous cleanup, Henry passed through the service corridor on his way to his study. As he crossed paths with Evelyn, he paused briefly. "Thank you for how you handled the situation tonight," he said without looking directly at her. "Not everyone would have shown such dignity." Before she could reply, he continued on, leaving behind only the echo of his words. Evelyn stood still for a few moments, feeling her heart pound beneath the simple uniform. The humiliation Genevieve had tried to impose had not taken root. In its place, something firmer, deeper had begun to grow, a quiet certainty that her presence there, however unwanted by some, was beginning to take hold. That night, as she collected the last glasses, Evelyn looked around the now empty hall, still bathed in the soft light of the chandeliers, and felt that though the game of power would continue, she was no longer an ignored piece. She was someone who moved between the shadows and the light, seen, remembered, and perhaps respected. The afternoon breeze glided over the hills of Ashford Hall with the softness of an old whisper. The rose leaves swayed slowly, casting delicate shadows over the stone paths in the garden, as if dancing to a melody only the wind could hear. The sky, a pale, almost translucent blue, promised a calm night. No rain, no thunder, just the deep silence of an estate that kept its secrets in every wall, every flower. Evelyn walked slowly, carrying a small basket with seeds and gardening tools in her hands. Since Lydia's recovery, she had been given permission to help restore the greenhouse, a space that had been ignored for years, sealed by grief and absence. The work, however, was not merely physical. There was something almost spiritual in the act of reviving the beauty of a place once full of life, a gesture that spoke of healing, even in silence. Each afternoon, Evelyn would clear dry leaves, rearrange broken pots, scrub moss from the glass, and organize the benches. She expected no company, nor sought attention. That was her moment of respite, her secret refuge within the boundaries life had imposed. As she pushed open the iron door, she felt the soft warmth of the greenhouse wrap around her skin. The scent was a mixture of damp earth, freshly planted herbs, and the light fragrance of flowers just beginning to bloom. She placed the basket on one of the benches and began replanting small lavender sprouts, focusing on the muffled sound of her own breathing. That was when she sensed someone behind her. She rose slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, and turned. Henry Ashford stood at the entrance, hands in his coat pockets and eyes fixed on her, not sternly, but with an expression that mixed surprise with something softer, perhaps curiosity, perhaps longing. "You're more alive than I remember," he said after a few seconds, glancing at the flowers around them. Evelyn nodded, her voice low, almost reverent. "Nature needs time, and someone to listen to it." Henry walked slowly among the pots. As one would tread on sacred ground, he ran his fingers over a new leaf and released a quiet sigh. "My wife used to spend entire afternoons here," he murmured more to himself than to her. "She always told me plants understood what words could not." Evelyn watched him carefully, without interrupting. There was something different in his voice. A restrained fragility that did not match the image of the austere man he projected to the world. Here, among pots and soil, he was not the untouchable Duke, but a man scarred by losses that still hurt. She left a part of herself in every corner of this greenhouse, he continued, looking around. For a long time, I thought reviving this place would be a mistake, as if her memory were tied to the abandonment. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice firm but gentle. It's not neglect that honors the dead, but caring for what they loved. Henry looked at her, and in that moment something passed between them. A silent recognition, a bond forged not through words but through mutual understanding of what it means to grieve. Their eyes held each other long enough for both to feel the tension rise, thick and undeniable. He stepped closer to the bench where she had left the tools. He picked up a pair of pruning shears and twirled them gently between his fingers. "Strange," he said with a half-smile. "I never pictured you as someone who knew how to tend flowers." "Perhaps you never truly looked," she replied softly but without submission. Henry let out a short, low laugh. The sound felt more intimate than it should have. Then he turned serious again. "I have looked," he said sincerely, "more than I'd like to admit." The silence that followed was too dense to ignore. Evelyn lowered her eyes, feeling her cheeks flush. It wasn't shame, it was something more primal, more intimate. The kind of warmth that blooms when one soul recognizes another, when the body senses the presence of someone who is no longer just a figure in the background, but a point of light, even if still blurred. Henry stepped closer. He was now near enough for Evelyn to catch the faint scent of his clothing, a blend of sandalwood and wind. His gaze drifted to her hands still stained with soil, then returned to her face. The tension between them was palpable. The air felt thinner, as if time itself had paused out of mischief. "If someone had told me months ago that a maid would be the one to restore this place, and something more," he said, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion, "I would have laughed." "And now," Evelyn whispered, unable to stop the question. Henry hesitated. His eyes gleamed under the light filtering through the greenhouse glass. They seemed ready to say something important, something that might not be taken back, but instead he stepped away. "Now, I don't laugh." She remained still, feeling his absence expand in the space between them like a lengthening shadow. The moment had passed, but it hadn't vanished. It would linger there, suspended in the air, like the scent of freshly cut flowers, invisible yet present. He turned, walked to the door, and before leaving cast her one last glance. "Keep tending to the flowers, Evelyn. They respond well to you." And then he was gone. She stayed there, alone in the greenhouse, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps. Slowly, she sat on the edge of the bench and rested her hands on her lap, eyes fixed on a distant point between the leaves and the pale sky. She knew with the certainty only attentive hearts possess that something had changed. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the prelude to something deeper, more dangerous, more real than anything she had ever felt. The garden was no longer just a garden, and she was no longer just a maid. The storm did not announce its arrival with gentleness. It crashed upon the hills of Ashford Hall with sudden fury, as if the skies had decided to unleash all the rage accumulated over weeks of silence in a single burst. The first thunderclaps echoed in the distance, but the sky quickly darkened with thick clouds, and a biting wind began to rattle the windows, creak the shutters, and shake the doors. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere grew tense, as if the very foundations of the house could sense the approach of something that transcended the natural wrath of the rain. Evelyn, who was folding linens in the laundry room, looked up at the window and saw the sky collapse into a downpour, thick, relentless. A shiver ran down her spine, not just from the sudden chill, but from a nameless anguish that swelled in her chest. Leaving the linens on the table, she hurried through the corridors. The lamps flickered in the wind that crept through the cracks. She climbed the stairs with firm steps, her heart beating with urgency. Upon reaching the children's wing, she found Clara sobbing, clutching a pillow. Lydia, curled in a corner of the bed, tried to comfort her sister with soft words, but her own expression betrayed a fear she couldn't hide. "It's all right, my dears," said Evelyn, kneeling before Clara. "I'm here now, no one will let the wind carry you away." The next thunderclap made the window tremble violently. Evelyn rushed to it, checking the latch. It was loose. The wind had forced it open, and rain now poured through the gaps. Quickly, she pulled the heavy curtains and shut the shutters tight, fastening them with the iron hook. She turned back to the girls and wrapped them both in a blanket. "Stay here together. I'll fetch something to keep you warm." She rushed downstairs, through darkened halls, past nervous servants whispering about lightning striking the trees around the estate. In the kitchen, she asked for a kettle of boiling water and a warming pad. On her way back, she heard a loud crack from the outer wing, followed by a dull thud. Her heart raced. Without thinking, she dropped the warming pad and ran toward the sound. One of the side doors leading to the winter garden had burst open. Water pooled on the floor and the wind howled like a wild beast. Crossing the threshold, she slipped, steadying herself against a column. Outside, in the shadows and lightning, she saw Clara. The girl had chased her doll, carried away by the wind into the garden, and now stood shivering in the rain, soaked to the bone, her feet sunken in mud. "Clara," Evelyn shouted, running toward her. She knelt to embrace her, shielding the child with her own body. Clara sobbed, clinging to her chest. Evelyn tried to rise, but the mud and rain made it difficult. Then a strong voice broke through the storm. "Evelyn." It was Henry. He appeared like a shadow among the raindrops, his face tense, hair plastered to his forehead. Without hesitation, he ran to them, lifted Clara into his arms and extended a hand to Evelyn, pulling her up firmly. His eyes held something rare, fear, a raw, uncontrollable fear that revealed far more than words ever could. Together they crossed the waterlogged garden, returning through the side door. Once inside, Henry passed Clara to a maid's arms, ordering a warm bath and dry clothes for her. Only he and Evelyn remained in the dim corridor, both breathless, drenched, their faces dangerously close. "You could have died out there," he said, voice rough, almost too low to hear. "I didn't think about that," she replied. "I only thought of protecting them." Henry said nothing. His intense eyes stayed fixed on hers. The faint lamplight highlighted the rain dripping from his temples, and Evelyn could clearly see the storm within him. His jaw was clenched and his hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from something deeper. Without warning, he stepped forward. The space between them vanished. His hands touched her arms, then her shoulders, then rose to cup her face with tender care. Evelyn felt his breath mingle with hers, warm, urgent. His eyes searched hers for permission that words could not request. And she didn't pull away. The kiss came with the intensity of a truth long suppressed. It was soft at first, restrained, but quickly deepened, charged with emotions both had tried to bury. His hands on her face were strong yet gentle, as if afraid she might dissolve in his arms. Evelyn felt the world fall away, leaving only that moment, that touch, that warmth spreading like a fire lit in midwinter. But then, as if something snapped him back to reality, Henry pulled away suddenly. His eyes remained on her, now shadowed by an overwhelming inner conflict. He ran a hand through his wet hair and stepped back as if needing to breathe. "This shouldn't have happened," he murmured. Evelyn stayed silent. She knew there was no use denying what she had felt. She knew he couldn't deny it either. "I'm sorry," he said, voice unsteady. "I lost control. It was reckless, wrong." She only nodded, unable to speak. There had been no wrongdoing in what they'd shared, only truth. But there were walls between them, still unbroken, that no kiss, however real, could yet overcome. Henry walked away slowly, his heavy steps echoing down the stone corridor. Evelyn remained there, alone, the wet fabric clinging to her skin, her heartbeat thundering like drums inside her chest. At the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows, Peg Wilkins watched. Her small dark eyes glinted with the silent satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed something that would change everything. And it didn't take long for the firm steps of the housekeeper to echo through the halls, carrying the news to where it needed to go. The next morning, Genevieve Prescott received a short letter, written in rushed handwriting. As she finished reading it, she smiled bitterly. The storm, it seemed, had only just begun. The morning was born beneath a thick shroud of mist, covering Ashford Hall like a gray veil that seemed to muffle even the sound of the birds inside the mansion. The atmosphere was one of restrained unease. The always silent walls seemed to whisper rumors that spread like smoke through the corridors. Servants avoided meeting each other's eyes. Their voices grew hushed, their steps more cautious. Something hung in the air, dense, ready to descend. Henry Ashford awoke early that morning but did not rise immediately. Seated in the armchair by the window of his study, he stared at the dew-covered garden, his gaze lost in thoughts that had haunted him since the night before. The kiss, the touch, the faint scent of Evelyn mingled with the aroma of wet earth. His body still carried the trace of that dangerous closeness, that brief surrender to what his duty had always denied him. He ran his hands over his face as if trying to wipe away what he had felt, as if guilt, silent as desire, could be swept aside with a simple gesture. But there was no escape. He knew he had crossed a line, and more than that, he knew Genevieve knew. Hours earlier, in the dead of night, Peg Wilkins had delivered a letter to his door. He had found it resting on his desk, carefully folded, sealed with red wax. Its content was clear. Subtle yet sharp accusations about the behavior of the maid Evelyn Carter. A veiled warning about what society might think, about what his position demanded, about what a woman like Genevieve could do or destroy. Beside the letter was an envelope containing another document, a dismissal letter drafted by the housekeeper, ready to be signed. Wilkins, ever meticulous, knew how to operate behind the scenes. Henry stared at the paper for long minutes. The pen in his hand trembled slightly. No one else was in the room. The decision was his alone. He could have torn the paper, could have confronted Genevieve, could have, perhaps for the first time, not hidden behind his role. But then he thought of his daughters, of the family's reputation, of the walls of that house that still bore his late wife's name. And he signed. Not with anger, not with resolve, but with the heavy hand of someone surrendering not to duty, but to guilt. In the kitchen that same dawn, Evelyn was preparing tea for Clara, who had woken with a slight fever. Her body still bore the fatigue of the previous days, and her soul a whirlwind of emotions she could hardly name. The kiss with Henry had awakened something that frightened her, not because it was forbidden, but because it was real. When Peg Wilkins entered, Evelyn immediately sensed something was wrong. The woman held a rolled parchment in her hands, her chin lifted like a verdict already passed. "You are dismissed, Miss Carter," she announced bluntly. "The Duke signed your termination this morning." Evelyn turned pale. "But I've done nothing wrong. The children. The children will have other hands. The master of the house owes no explanations to the help." Wilkins cut her off with disdain. "Gather your things. You'll be taken to the road at sunrise." The words struck like daggers. Evelyn felt the ground vanish beneath her feet, but she stood tall. She would not beg. She would not cry. She took her apron, walked to the children's quarters, and entered without knocking. Lydia and Clara were still asleep, their innocent faces resting in the brief peace of slumber. Evelyn knelt between the two beds. She ran her fingers through Clara's hair and then gently held Lydia's hand. The tears came silently, unbidden. There were no words to explain, no farewell that could be fair. "I love you," she whispered, voice choked. "I always will." She rose before the weeping overtook her. She left the room like a shadow. Soon after, the girls woke and, realizing Evelyn was gone, ran through the halls searching for her. When they found Wilkins on the entrance steps, they cried in desperation, begging her to let Evelyn stay. "She can't go," Clara cried. "She promised she'd never leave us." Lydia, usually composed, clung to the housekeeper's dress. "It's not fair, please, please." But Wilkins, implacable, turned away coldly. She ordered a maid to take them back to their rooms and not let them out until midday. Meanwhile, Evelyn had already left the house. The coachman, a quiet man with a pitying gaze, drove the carriage along the wet road through the trees, saying nothing. She carried no luggage, only her mother's book, a small purse of coins, and the memory of the garden that would never be hers. When she stepped down just before the fork in the road leading to the village, Evelyn turned one last time. Ashford Hall appeared in the distance like a silhouette in the mist, as imposing as it was unreachable. She stood there for a moment in silence. There was no one to see her, no face at the window, no hand waving. Even so she spoke, not loudly, not with anger. "Never again," she murmured. "I will never depend on anyone again." And then she turned and walked away, each step a rupture, each heartbeat a new scar, but also deep down a beginning. A painful, lonely beginning, but hers. The village of Elmridge lay nestled among rolling hills, where slate rooftops darkened with the morning damp and street lamps were lit even before dusk. It was a place forgotten by maps, where people spoke in hushed tones, gestures were discreet, and routines were sacred. Nothing happened there unnoticed, and yet it was the perfect refuge for anyone who needed to disappear. Evelyn arrived under the weight of rain, wrapped in a worn wool shawl, her boots caked in mud, her eyes marked by what she could not tell. She stepped down from the carriage and did not look back. Her hands clutched the strap of her small bag as if the old fabric could keep her from falling apart. The door to the tailor's shop opened before she could knock. Mr. Lawson, a short man with graying hair and kind eyes, opened his arms with a warmth she no longer expected to find. "Evelyn, my God, how you've grown. Come in, this is no time to be standing in the street, especially not looking like you're carrying the weight of the world." She entered without a word. The tears didn't come, but her body trembled, and the way her gaze clung to the floor betrayed that something inside her had broken. In the days that followed, Evelyn settled into a small room at the back of the shop. The bed was narrow, the mattress thin, but the silence was comforting, and the absence of judging eyes a relief. The tailor's shop, known for its well-cut suits and fine cotton dresses, was frequented by merchants, discreet widows, and young men dreaming of new uniforms to court a lady. It was a simpler, more honest world, and though Evelyn knew she might never truly belong to it, she allowed herself that shelter. She quickly learned the craft. Her hands, once used to domestic chores, proved precise with the needle. Stitch by stitch, seam by seam, she began to mend not just fabric but the torn pieces of her soul. She didn't complain, didn't question, didn't confide. With each fitted dress, a new part of herself grew stronger. The pain was still there, but now it was being sewn together with threads of purpose. It was on a Saturday afternoon, when the sun finally broke through after days of persistent drizzle, that Thomas returned to the shop. He arrived with tousled hair and a soaked coat, his face carrying an urgency Evelyn recognized immediately. She met him in the workshop, away from Mr. Lawson's view, who remained absorbed with his customers like a watchmaker. "I need to talk to you," he said, lowering his voice. "I found something that could change everything." Evelyn frowned. She sat down across from him, hands folded in her lap, her eyes focused. Thomas pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket and laid it on the table between them. "One of Ashford Hall's former servants, a gardener who worked there during the Duchess's time. He found me, said he remembered me and asked about you, and then he told me what he heard around the time of her death." Evelyn hesitated, but then reached for the envelope and pulled out a note written in trembling script. "There were arguments, voices in the greenhouse. One night I saw Lady Genevieve leaving through the back. The Duchess looked pale in the following days. Then she fell ill. Something was put in the tea. I know it." Reading the words made Evelyn's blood run cold. "There's no solid proof," Thomas said anxiously, "but he swore Lady Genevieve visited the house even when she claimed not to, always at night in disguise. He said the Duchess trusted her, that they exchanged letters." Evelyn gripped the paper, her breath uneven. "Why didn't he speak up before?" "Fear. He says Genevieve has influence in the courts, friends among magistrates, but now he's old, ill, and says he needs to clear his conscience before he dies." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. The hushed whispers, the silence in the corridors, the unfinished journal, the shadow in Henry's eyes. The Duchess hadn't simply fallen ill. Something else had happened, something that explained Henry's silent guilt, his fear of memory, his refusal to look back. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Thomas hesitated, then smiled with a trace of tenderness. "Because you deserve to know, and because, despite everything, I still care about you." She didn't respond immediately. She folded the note carefully, tucked it among the fabrics in her bag, and stood. "Thank you," she said simply. Thomas also rose, but before leaving he added in a low voice, "Don't let them erase your story, Evelyn, or bury it beneath the whims of people like Genevieve Prescott." She remained there still, listening as his footsteps faded down the corridor. That night, as she sewed by the flickering light of an oil lamp, Evelyn reflected on what she had learned. She felt no anger. What drove her now was something sharper, clearer. The certainty that for the first time she held something that could change the game. She, who had always stood at the margins, now held a key, and with it the chance to reclaim not only herself, but the memory of someone who had been silenced. She looked at her hands, now steady over the fabric, and thought of everything she had endured. She was no longer the girl who had arrived at that mansion with eyes full of fear. She was a wounded woman, yes, but one who knew her worth. And as the first raindrops began to patter again on the tailor shop's roof, Evelyn quietly traced the next stitch in her own story. This time not as a victim, but as the author of her own fate. Morning began to emerge gently over the green hills of Elmridge. A fine mist blanketed the fields, and the first rays of sunlight filtered shyly through the treetops, casting long shadows over the damp ground. The narrow streets still slept, with shuttered shops, half-closed windows, and silence broken only by the distant creak of a slow-moving cart. In the back room of Mr. Lawson's tailor shop, Evelyn sewed in silence. Her hands, swift as ever, seemed to follow the rhythm of her thoughts that in recent days had grown heavier, sharper, as if each stitch in the fabric were a seam in her own unfinished story. The gardener's note lay folded between the pages of the late Duchess's journal, carefully tucked away in the drawer of the dresser. It was not just a clue. It was a breath of truth within a sea of lies, a fragment of what Ashford Hall had worked so hard to silence. That was when a frantic noise came from the front door. A quick knock followed by a muffled voice. Evelyn stood at once, her heart racing for no apparent reason. She walked into the hall, crossing the creaking floorboards with bated breath. When she opened the door, what she saw took her breath away. Lydia. The girl stood there, soaked through, her braids undone, her dress stained with mud. Her eyes were glassy with tears and her knees scraped, and yet her posture was resolute, as if nothing in the world could have stopped her from getting there. "Lydia," Evelyn whispered, kneeling to receive her. The girl threw herself into her arms, sobbing quietly against her shoulder. "I ran away," she said between sobs. "They wouldn't let me see you. They wouldn't let me write. Peg Wilkins locked our room at night, but I knew the coachman had brought you here. I waited and I came." Evelyn held her close, her eyes moist, her heart torn between pain and tenderness. This child was no longer just the Duke's daughter. She was hers, bound by a love that defied explanation, by a bond sewn through nights of fear and afternoons of reading, through hidden smiles and silent promises. Not long after, the sound of hurried hooves sliced through the village street. Evelyn looked out the window and saw Ashford Hall's dark carriage stop in front of the shop. The coachman jumped down, and moments later, Henry Ashford. He entered like a storm held back, his eyes ablaze, his face tense, his hair tousled from the ride. When he saw Lydia safe in Evelyn's arms, the Duke's breath eased visibly, though his expression remained hard. "Thank God," he murmured, "she's safe." The girl ran to him, hugging him tightly. "I'm not sick, I'm not hurt, I'm just sad." Henry held her close, his eyes closed for a moment. When he regained composure, he looked at Evelyn. His gaze was full of conflict, relief and sorrow, recognition and regret. She, however, did not look away. "Find your daughter a room to rest," she said calmly, "then we'll talk." He nodded slightly, and Evelyn called a young woman from the village, who took Lydia to a room with warm water and dry clothes. Only then did Evelyn and Henry remain alone in the workshop, surrounded by the scent of fabric, the spools of thread, and the remnants of a routine devoid of nobility, but rich in quiet dignity. "I didn't know," he began, his voice low. "I didn't know Wilkins had acted like that. I didn't know Lydia had run until I found her gone this morning. What she told me. That they wouldn't let her say goodbye. That they wouldn't let her write. That the doors were locked." Evelyn interrupted, her voice steady but not bitter. "Miss Wilkins acted with zeal, yes, but not alone. She was encouraged." Henry fell silent. The air between them grew heavy, as if every breath had weight. "By Genevieve," he said at last. Evelyn walked to the dresser, retrieved the Duchess's journal and the note, and handed both to the Duke, her hands firm. "There are things that need to be said, things that need to be read. For too long, Henry, you've walked among shadows you refuse to face, but I've seen them, the shadows, and I've found names among them." He turned the pages carefully. He recognized the handwriting of his late wife. The memory struck him with force, bowing his shoulders. He read the gardener's note, his eyes widening as he understood its meaning. "This is an accusation," he murmured, "a serious one." "And a true one," Evelyn said, stepping closer, her eyes locked on his. The Duchess wasn't just ill, she was weakened, silenced, and who stood to gain from that? Who wanted her place, her daughters, her influence? Henry ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "And I saw nothing, or I chose not to. Guilt wears many faces, but it's not too late to do what's right." He looked at her then with a depth that made her tremble. He was no longer just the Duke. He was a man torn by his own neglect, waking from a slumber far too long. "Evelyn," he said, his voice hoarse, "what I did to you, what I allowed them to do, She raised her hand, stopping him with a gentle gesture. "I'm not here for apologies, Henry. I'm here because Lydia came to find me, because Clara cries in the dark, and because your house is rotting from the inside. If you don't act now, there will be nothing left to rebuild." Silence returned to the room, but now it was a different silence, one shaped by a decision about to be made. Henry folded the note and placed it in his coat pocket. Then he closed the journal with almost ceremonial care. "I promise I'll investigate, discreetly, justly, and if it's true, everything will change." Evelyn nodded, but she did not smile. There was something final in that conversation, something that shifted the foundations of all they had built or lost until now. At the door before leaving, he turned one last time. "She still talks about you, Clara. She dreams of your scent. Lydia draws you in the margins of her books." Evelyn felt her eyes sting, but she said nothing. She only closed the door softly, keeping the warmth of his words close. That night the village slept in silence, but Ashford Hall, even from afar, had begun to awaken. It was a quiet, somber morning, as if the sky itself, cloaked in a thick veil of clouds, waited in suspense for what was about to unfold. On the outside, Ashford Hall looked unchanged, imposing, solid, with its towers rising proudly above the valley. But inside, something had shifted. There was a restrained movement in the corridors, a tension perceptible even among the oldest servants, who exchanged quick glances and avoided unnecessary conversation. The return of Henry Ashford, Duke of a long-revered name, had stirred more than murmurs within the estate's walls. What few knew or dared imagine was that this morning something would finally be revealed, something that had been buried for years beneath veils of convenience, secrets, and carefully crafted silence. Henry walked through the halls with firm steps, He wore a dark coat and an expression that mixed pain and resolve. In his hands he carried the Duchess's journal, carefully wrapped in a linen cloth. At his side Evelyn walked silently, her eyes fixed ahead, her face serene but resolute. She carried not only truths but scars, and more than that, courage. The main parlor, decorated to receive esteemed guests, had been prepared with simplicity. The chandeliers were lit and the fireplace crackled softly, warding off the morning chill. Genevieve Prescott awaited them there, seated with her usual poise, dressed in shades of wine and ebony. Her beautifully made-up face betrayed no emotion, but her slightly narrowed eyes revealed unease. When she saw them enter together, the stiffness in her posture sharpened. "What an honor, Your Grace," she said with a faint smile rising. "And Miss Carter, I didn't imagine you'd return to this house with such pride in your eyes." Henry didn't answer immediately. He walked to the table in the center of the room, unwrapped the journal, and placed it before her with a precise gesture. Genevieve looked at the object as though she recognized a ghost. "You recognize this, don't you?" he said, his voice firm. Genevieve crossed her arms. "An old notebook, the Duchess's perhaps. Many women keep journals, dreams, fantasies, sentimental nonsense." Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes locked on Genevieve's. "This journal holds more than daydreams. It holds memories, details, pain, and questions that never found answers." Genevieve raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Henry opened the journal. He read aloud selected passages in which the Duchess described her growing weakness after visits from a friend who brought her infusions and advice disguised as affection. She also noted the increasing influence that this friend had over the staff, particularly over Peg Wilkins. At the end of the reading, Henry stared at Genevieve for a long moment. The doctors said the cause of death was a sudden fever, but there were no signs of infection, and now we know that before falling ill, she reported recurring symptoms after drinking the teas you brought her. Genevieve let out a dry laugh. "You truly believe those frail words can tarnish my name? A journal, Henry? The writings of a woman emotionally unstable, abandoned by her own husband?" The strike was direct, but Henry did not waver. "Which would make me complicit if I remained silent." The door opened, and Peg Wilkins was brought into the room by a servant. She walked in with slumped shoulders and anxious eyes. Genevieve looked at her first with surprise, then with disdain. "What is this woman doing here?" "She has something to say," Evelyn answered. There was a long silence before Peg spoke. Her voice, hesitant at first, grew firmer with each word. I knew from the beginning something was wrong. I saw Genevieve manipulate the lady. I saw her bring the vials, the powders, but I stayed silent, because she threatened me, promised I'd keep my position if I helped her, and if I spoke out." "You lied to protect your own comfort," Evelyn cut in firmly, "and helped destroy a woman who trusted you." Peg fell to her knees, her eyes filled with tears, her wrinkled face marked by remorse. "I can't carry this any longer. The Duchess died because of my cowardice, and I ask forgiveness from everyone." Genevieve remained still, her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze venomous. For a moment she looked ready to erupt. But then she stepped back gracefully, adjusted her skirt, and spoke with contempt. Words of a weak maid, and of a man who upon losing his wife lost his mind. Henry crossed his arms. "Perhaps I did lose my mind for a time, but I haven't lost my sense of justice, and justice will be done." That afternoon, a letter was drafted. It was addressed to the region's most influential social circles. It included not only Wilkins's confession, but copies of passages from the journal. Evelyn wrote every line with precision, without hatred, only truth. Genevieve was formally stripped of any role tied to Ashford Hall. She was denied further visits and shunned from the social circles she once frequented. Her name became a subject of cautious whispers, and the haughty gaze she once wore was replaced by quiet contempt. For someone like her, social exile was a punishment more severe than any formal sentence. Peg Wilkins left the house without fanfare. She asked only that her belongings be brought to her quietly. Henry acknowledged her departure with a brief nod. There was no immediate forgiveness, but neither was there vengeance, only a door that closed. And then, as if a weight had been lifted from the foundation of the mansion, Ashford Hall breathed. The windows were opened. The maids giggled softly in the halls. Clara began to hum again in the garden. Lydia relearned how to write poetry. And Henry visited the greenhouse one afternoon, alone and silent. He walked among the replanted flowers and laid his fingers on the clean glass. He stayed there a long time. Because at last, the shadow that had hovered over the house began to lift. And in the heart of the mansion, quietly, a new space was born. A space where the truth, even painful, had finally found shelter. Spring had finally settled over the fields surrounding Ashford Hall, bringing with it a softness that touched the stone walls, the garden paths, and even the silence of the mansion. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gentle one. Like the cautious return of something long exiled, the shadows still lingered, but they were no longer sovereign. The air held a different weight, a quieter rhythm. In the library, Henry sat at his desk reviewing documents he had long avoided. Outside the tall windows, the garden bloomed again. The greenhouse, once a place of grief and silence, was now tended daily. The memory of the Duchess remained, but it no longer haunted, it honored, and at the center of these quiet shifts was Evelyn Carter. No longer a maid, not quite a lady, she moved through the house with a quiet authority born not of title, but of merit. It had been Henry's decision to ask her to stay, not as a servant, but as the official governess of Lydia and Clara. Evelyn had hesitated at first. Acceptance was not easy when one had lived for so long on the edge of belonging. But the children's arms around her waist, their whispered pleas, and the light in their eyes had done what no promise or title could. Evelyn agreed to stay. She took over the children's education with the same discipline and tenderness she had once shown them in secret. The schoolroom was transformed. Books were repaired, maps unfurled, and laughter became part of the daily lessons. Evelyn taught them geography and grammar, but also courage, kindness, and the value of truth. Her presence reshaped the rhythm of the house. The staff began to look to her with respect. The villagers, once skeptical, now greeted her by name. The dress she wore no longer marked her as a maid, but as someone who had carved a place of her own. She had not inherited her position, she had earned it. Henry watched all of it unfold with quiet awe, from afar at first, content to observe her from the edges of the room, through open doorways or across the dinner table. But little by little, he began to walk beside her again. One afternoon they crossed paths in the garden. Evelyn was trimming the rose bushes while Clara sketched nearby. Henry stopped by the greenhouse, watching her with a softness that had not been there before. When she turned and caught his gaze, neither of them looked away. "The roses have bloomed early this year," he said. "They've been cared for," she replied. He nodded slowly, and for a moment they simply stood there, two people no longer separated by title or fear. Later that week, Henry called Evelyn to his study. He did not wear the formal coat he reserved for meetings or guests. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and there was something vulnerable in his posture. "I wanted to thank you," he said once she stepped in, "for staying, for everything." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "I stayed for them." "Yes," he replied, "but also for yourself. I see that now." He walked to the window, took a breath, and turned back to face her. "I don't want to presume anything, but if there's space in your heart for something more, then know that I would offer you not a position, not a rescue, but a partnership, one chosen freely." Evelyn was silent for a moment. Then she smiled, not with surprise, but with the serenity of someone who had found her place. "You are not the man I met," she said softly, "and I am not the girl who arrived at your door." He stepped closer. "But we might become something better, together." Their hands met, tentative at first, then sure, and in that quiet gesture a promise was made, not of perfection but of truth. Ashford Hall was no longer a house ruled by mourning. It was becoming a home. And in its garden, beneath the blooming roses, the light had returned. The morning dawned diaphanous over Ashford Hall, bathing the estate in a golden light that filtered through the tall windows like a veil of hope. The air was warm, just enough to cast aside heavy shawls and allow the greenhouse doors to remain open, letting the scent of freshly bloomed flowers drift through the corridors. It was the beginning of a new season, quiet still, but as palpable as the breeze that stirred the white curtains of the east wing. Evelyn walked through the gardens with the steady pace of someone who knew each stone in the path, each flower planted with intention. Her hands rested on a closed book pressed gently to her chest, and her eyes, though calm, gazed at something not present, or perhaps something not yet arrived. In the distance, the light sound of children's laughter echoed from the fields. Lydia and Clara ran among the trees, followed by a young, smiling maid. The harmony of the scene warmed Evelyn's heart, but it did not quiet the restlessness that had grown within her in recent days. It was as if something was calling her, something that did not fit within the estate's boundaries, nor the walls of the affection that had blossomed there. It was in this setting of flowers and knowing silences that Henry found her. He approached along the gravel path with slow steps, his shoulders relaxed and his gaze steady. In his hands he carried a small bundle of white lilies wrapped in a linen cloth. The moment she saw him, Evelyn knew, even before he spoke, before his eyes met hers completely, she knew, and her heart quickened with a tenderness mingled with the weight of a fate she still hesitated to embrace. "They're for you," he said, offering her the flowers with a restrained smile. Evelyn accepted them, inhaling their fragrance gently before lifting her eyes to meet his. "Thank you." Henry took a deep breath. The wind played with the leaves around them, as if nature too was waiting. "Evelyn," he began, choosing his words carefully, "the house has come alive again. The girls are smiling once more, and I have returned as well, but something is still unfinished." She remained silent, her gaze unwavering. "I want you to stay, not as a governess, not as a shadow of the past. I want you to stay as the woman of this house, as my wife." His words hung between them with the solemnity of a vow. Henry did not kneel. He did not pull a ring from any pocket. His proposal was free of theatrics, yet full of meaning. He spoke not as a duke, but as a man who had stripped away pride to open himself to love. Evelyn felt her eyes begin to glisten. But she didn't answer immediately. She walked to a stone bench beneath the shade of a cherry tree and sat down, gently caressing the lily's petals. "When I arrived here," she said quietly, "I was just a maid, not in title but in circumstance. A frightened young woman sold by a man who should have protected her. Here I found more than shelter. I found the girls, I found the truth, I found you." Henry stood listening, his focus unbroken. "And now, after everything, you offer me what many would dream of accepting, a home, a name, a place." She lifted her eyes, glowing not with vanity but with clarity. "But Henry, I don't want to be chosen to be saved. I want to be chosen for who I am, but before that I need to choose myself." He frowned gently, not fully understanding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to go," she replied with the soft firmness of someone who loves without surrendering. "There's a seminar in Philadelphia. I've been accepted into a course focused on educating girls. I want to open my own school, to teach girls like Clara and Lydia, but also girls like me, girls who never had a voice, who don't know they have worth." Henry stepped closer, kneeling before her. He didn't touch her hands. He simply looked into her eyes as if seeking the soul behind her courage. "Are you refusing me?" She smiled tenderly. "I'm choosing myself for the first time, and if that means stepping away for a while, then I'll pay that price gladly, because if I ever come back it will be for me, not out of fear, not out of need, not to be rescued." Henry lowered his gaze, absorbing her words. He took a deep breath, and when he looked up again his expression had changed. It wasn't resignation, it was honor. "Then go," he said, his voice steady. "Go and build what you dream. Be the woman you were born to be. I'll wait, not as a duty, not as a punishment, but because I know no one else could ever take your place in me." A tear slipped down Evelyn's cheek, silent, for the first time not from pain but from freedom. He rose, extended his hand, and helped her to her feet. They walked together back to the greenhouse, and there they said goodbye with a lingering embrace, their bodies touching less than their hearts. There was a quiet warmth in it, a silent promise, a flame that did not need to burn to stay alive. The next morning Evelyn departed. She carried few clothes, her books, the Duchess's journal, and the girls' letters. But within her she carried the most important thing, the certainty that true love does not bind, it frees, and because of that it can wait. Ashford Hall was quieter that day, but not sorrowful, because everyone knew the woman who had left would one day return, not as a maid, not as anyone's wife, but as Evelyn Carter. Hull. A year had passed since Evelyn Carter had left Ashford Hall with her head held high and her heart full of purpose. She had left behind not just a house, but an entire past, woven from imposed silences, broken promises, and a latent passion that had needed time to bloom. That clear June morning, the sky stretched bright over the hills of Pennsylvania, and the road leading to the mansion was lined with blooming wild daisies and lavender. The carriage moved slowly, as if each turn of the wheel carried the delicacy of memory. Inside, seated with quiet elegance, Evelyn watched the familiar landscape through the window, her heart beating in a serene but steady rhythm. She wore a light blue linen ensemble, simple, refined, and her hair was pulled into a low chignon adorned with a white satin ribbon. There was nothing left of the frightened girl who had once been brought here against her will. Evelyn was returning now as a woman made by her own choices. Over the past year, she had traveled to Philadelphia, where she joined intellectual circles led by reformist women. She had studied education with dedication, met women who, like her, had once been silenced and now spoke with clarity. With the help of Mr. Lawson and a few benefactors, she had founded a small school in Elmridge, dedicated to orphaned girls and daughters of laborers. There she taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and above all, courage. Yet as she approached the wrought iron gates of Ashford Hall, something inside her tightened, not with fear, with emotion, deep, contained, as steady as the earth beneath her feet. The coachman descended and opened the door. Evelyn stepped down gracefully and firmly, her eyes roaming over the now clean stone path, past the blooming rose bushes lining the entrance. The scent of flowers embraced her like a silent welcome. In the distance, Henry Ashford stood waiting at the entrance of the greenhouse, flanked by Lydia and Clara. The girls ran toward her before she could say a word. Clara threw herself into her arms, laughing, while Lydia, now older, hugged her with teary eyes. "You promised you'd come back," the eldest said, her voice trembling. "And I did," Evelyn answered, kissing her forehead. Henry remained silent, observing the scene with eyes shining in the evening light. He wore a simple beige linen suit, free of insignia or formality. His hair was slightly grayer at the temples, but his gaze remained the same, deep, attentive, honest. When they were finally alone, he motioned for her to follow him. They crossed the garden in silence until they reached the greenhouse, its glass gleaming under the golden afternoon light. Upon entering, Evelyn stopped. The flowers were in full bloom. Roses of every color, jasmine, dahlias, climbing vines that twisted up the iron columns, creating a small secret perfumed world. The earth was moist, the pots well cared for, and at the center of the greenhouse stood a small plaque of pale wood engraved with simple words. "To those who cultivate love in silence." She brought her hand to her lips, overcome with emotion. "This place," she murmured, "it's alive again." Henry stepped closer. "It is, because you taught us how to bring it back." She turned to him. Their eyes met, full of all that had never been spoken aloud but had always existed between them. "I never stopped thinking about this house," she said sincerely. "But I had to leave. I had to understand who I was outside of its walls. I had to prove to myself that my worth didn't come from what anyone could offer me, but from what I chose to build." Henry nodded, his gaze locked on hers. "I knew from the moment you left that I would only have you back if your freedom was your ally, not a price you paid." Then, with a restrained but deeply meaningful gesture, he pulled a small blue velvet box from his pocket. He opened it. Inside lay an old ring, simple, with a matte gold band and a single pearl at its center, discreet, timeless, meant not to adorn but to honor. "I offer no title, no rescue, only my life, my home, my truth, and the chance to build something new together, as equals. Evelyn, will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. Evelyn took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering but steady. "Yes," she said at last, "but with one condition." Henry smiled softly. "What is it?" "That the greenhouse remains open, for the village girls, for anyone who needs to learn that flowers can grow even from stone." He extended his hand, she took it gently, and together they stood in the heart of the reborn paradise. Outside, the children watched through the glass. Lydia squeezed her younger sister's hand, smiling with a light in her eyes that needed no words. In the last scene of that day, the sun set behind the hills, the final rays gilded the open rose petals, and through the leaves the wind whispered old stories and new promises. Ashford Hall at last bloomed. And in Evelyn's heart there was no more fear, no more longing, no more sorrow. Only the certainty that it was possible to love without losing freedom. And that even roses, when tended with truth, could bloom where once there had only been thorns. 10 years had passed since Evelyn Carter left Ashford Hall, her head held high and her heart full of purpose. She had not simply left behind a house, but an entire past woven from imposed silences, broken promises, and a love that had needed time and patience to truly bloom. On that clear June morning, the sky stretched bright over the hills of Pennsylvania, and the road leading to the mansion was framed by blooming wild daisies and fragrant lavender. The carriage moved slowly, as if each turn of the wheel carried the weight of memory. Inside, seated with serene grace, Evelyn watched the familiar landscape through the window, her heart steady and calm. She wore a simple but refined light blue linen dress, her hair pinned into a low chignon adorned with a white satin ribbon. Nothing about her resembled the frightened girl who had once been brought here against her will. Evelyn returned now as a woman forged by her own choices. In the years she had been away, she traveled to Philadelphia, joining intellectual circles led by reformist women. She studied education with dedication, met others who had once been silenced but now spoke with unwavering clarity. With the help of Mr. Lawson and a few benefactors, she founded a small school in the village of Elmridge, teaching orphan girls and daughters of laborers how to read, write, calculate, and above all, how to believe in their own worth. Yet standing once more before the wrought iron gates of Ashford Hall, her heart tightened, not with fear but with emotion, deep, steady, and fierce as the ground beneath her feet. The coachman stepped down and opened the door. Evelyn descended with a graceful confidence, her eyes sweeping over the clean stone path, past the blooming roses that lined the entryway. The scent of flowers enveloped her like an old friend. In the distance, Henry Ashford stood waiting by the entrance to the greenhouse, flanked by Lydia and Clara. The girls broke into a run before Evelyn could even call to them. Clara threw herself into her arms, laughing, while Lydia, now taller and more composed, embraced her with tearful eyes. "You promised you would come back," Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. "And I have," Evelyn replied, kissing her forehead. Henry remained at a distance, watching. His eyes glinting under the soft light of the setting sun. He wore a simple beige linen suit, free from any insignias or pretense. His hair had grayed slightly at the temples, but his gaze remained unchanged, deep, steady, and utterly sincere. When they were finally alone, he motioned for her to follow him. They crossed the garden in silence, until they reached the greenhouse, its glass panels shimmering in the golden afternoon light. Inside, Evelyn paused, breathless. The greenhouse was alive again. Roses of every color, jasmine, dahlias, and climbing vines wrapped around the iron columns, creating a secret fragrant paradise. The earth was rich and tended, the flower pots neatly arranged, and in the center a small plaque made of pale wood read simply, "To those who cultivate love in silence." She brought her hand to her lips, overwhelmed. "This place," she murmured, "it's alive again." Henry stepped closer. "It is," he said quietly, "because you taught us how to bring it back." Nshe turned to him, and their eyes met, full of everything that had never been spoken but had always been known. "I never stopped thinking about this place," Evelyn said, her voice sincere, "but I had to leave. I had to know who I was outside these walls. I had to prove to myself that my worth wasn't something given to me, it was something I chose to build." Henry nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I knew the day you left that if you ever returned, it would be by your own choice, and with your freedom intact." Then, with a quiet but profound gesture, he pulled a small blue velvet box from his pocket. Opening it, he revealed an antique gold ring with a single pearl. Simple, timeless, a symbol meant not to adorn but to honor. "I'm not offering you a title or a rescue. I'm offering you my life, my home, my truth, and the chance to build something new, together, as equals. Evelyn, will you marry me?" For a moment time stood still. Evelyn drew in a deep breath, her eyes shining but clear. "Yes," she said at last, "but on one condition," Henry smiled softly, "anything. That the greenhouse stays open, for the village girls, for anyone who needs to learn that flowers can grow even from stone." He extended his hand, she placed hers in it, delicate but certain, and together they stood there at the heart of the garden they had both helped to resurrect. Outside, the children watched through the glass. Lydia squeezed Clara's hand, smiling with a light in her eyes that said all the things words could not. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the last golden rays illuminated the blooming roses, and through the leaves the wind whispered old stories and new promises. Ashford Hall at long last had truly bloomed, and in Evelyn's heart there was no more fear, no more longing, no more sorrow, only the enduring certainty that true love does not chain, it frees, and that even roses, when nurtured with truth, can bloom where once there were only thorns. And so ends the journey of Evelyn Carter, a woman who was sold as a servant but refused to live as a prisoner. In a world that tried to silence her, she chose the hardest path, the path of courage, freedom, and a love that honors who you are. She taught us through every choice and every step that worth isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, one choice at a time, one sacrifice, one new beginning. How many times, like Evelyn, are we pushed into places we never chose? And yet, inside each of us, there's a quiet strength, the power to turn pain into purpose and captivity into possibility. And when love doesn't try to rescue us but chooses to walk beside us, that's when it truly blooms. If you made it to the end, comment the word roses below. That way, we'll know you were with us all the way, and that you're part of this beautiful community of hearts that still believe in the power of period romance. Now tell me, what was the most emotional moment in this story for you? Would you have made the same choices as Evelyn? Drop your thoughts in the comments, give us a like, share with someone who loves a good love story, and of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next tale we have coming your way. Because here, in our little corner, love never goes out of style.